and welcome to Loving the Journey. I'm Donna Cundy, and today I am joined by Ari Rastegar, and I'm so excited to be the host here of Loving the Journey. We're going to be talking about your journey, Ari's journey behind the mic, and what podcasting has done to shape him, his businesses, his best-selling books, all of these things that many of us aspire to behind the microphone. So thank you so much, Ari, for joining us and talking so openly today.
Thank you, Donna.
And a little bit about Ari, if you have never met him before. Ari Rastegar is a real estate investor. He's an author and entrepreneur known for turning failure into long-term leverage. Starting with a $3,500 loan in law school, he went on to build a multi-billion dollar real estate portfolio. And along the way, learned that real success just isn't about capital, but clarity, resilience, and health as well. Today, Rastegar shares hard-earned lessons on building sustainable success from the inside out. He consistently delivers thoughtful content and brings an engaged audience of way more than 750,000 followers across social platforms. And it is such a delight to have you here today in the studio.
Thank you,
So,
Donna.
Ari, tell me, um, what was your inspiration to get behind the microphone? We're speaking to podcasters out there who are maybe in the early to middle stages of their journey and sharing what they are passionate about with the world. How did you get started?
Well, specifically to that vantage point, I have learned so much from podcasts myself. And I'm eternally grateful for some of these hosts that, they really take this leap because it's not easy. It's once you start getting into it, you realize you have to do production and, calendar management and people don't show up and you have to clip them and post them and, all these things. But I have had such a wealth of knowledge being able to hear, some of, my mentors, some unsuspecting people I'd never even heard of, and hear their stories, hear their journeys. So me, myself, like, I'm a fan of the modality, myself. And if I can get people to continually know to kind of keep going along the process and expect for it to be hard, but know that there is so many people, even if you see one of these videos you post or podcasts and it has sixty views. And you're like, oh, it's only 60 views or it's this small number. Imagine being in a room speaking to 60 people. 60 people were actually in the room. Like, oh my God, there's 60 people in this room that can be touched by this journey, by this discussion, by this collaboration. So if you have, that draw, and I always say, God doesn't tease, so if you have that inkling of that thought in your mind that you could do this, chances are you should. And if you are, continuing to go through that process, there's so many great platforms out right now. One that, our team has started to use recently called Podmatch that is only, $65 a month. And I don't sponsor them or anything like that. I use them where if you're a host, you can connect with great guests and curate them and talk with them. And you're really helping a lot of people and doing a great service by using this digital era to be able to connect with people, share with people, because you never know who's listening. You never know who's on the other side of it, what they're struggling with, what they're trying to learn. And if they can take one of those jewels and go out into the world and contribute with it, you could be doing a service so much greater than you maybe initially think you are on those beginning stages.
Mm, that's beautifully said. And you have taken behind the microphone both as a host and as a
I
guest.
have.
And so what have you noticed in the difference between the two? How do you show up as a host versus how you show up as a guest, and any kind of insights into that area?
Yeah, I think it's very different in some regard because I think of it as one of the marketing kind of mentors I've had over the years used to say questions are the answer. And so as a host, you're charged with asking incredible questions because if you take the time to ask a great question to a thoughtful guest, you're going to get a great answer. Okay, so as a guest, I find myself being on the other side of it, giving answers sometimes, and I prefer questions myself because I've come to find that me myself in my life asking a better question for the business as a father, as a friend in some sort of conflict or turmoil creates a better answer. So sometimes we just jump off with an answer, and I find that that's what amateurs do. Amateurs just have an answer for everything. In my experience, in the books that I've read and real life experiences, really thoughtful questions are so much more fulfilling and so much more fruitful for so many different reasons. So, as a host, taking the time and using, all these incredible tools out, like using ChatGPT, using Gemini, using just asking what are some of the best questions of something. I use these tools constantly now to enhance this human experience, to enhance human level dialogues instead of replacing them. So having the time to write at least two or three beautifully thoughtful questions curated for that guest, like doing your diligence on them, listening to other podcasts they've done, reading their press or their story, not only gives your guest a point of, maybe respecting the time that they're investing to do it, but also for your listeners and hopefully yourself. I know as a host, when I interviewed Sadhguru, who's a friend of mine, taking the time to ask him, a couple what I thought to be very thoughtful questions. I had so many benefits that I still cherish, to this day from being able to spend that time together. Not all guests need to be Sadhguru or this or that, but they all have their experience and they all have share a piece of wisdom and they live in this life experience. And like I said, you never know who's listening. And you as the host reap so many benefits of sharing this time with those individuals. And I think as the guest, you do too as well. But as a host, I think that honing in on the questions themselves will create for so much better of experience for the listeners.
Mm. Yeah, questions are really what it's all about. I think people, when they come in to want to listen to something, they want something that they can dig in and take away with, and
Yeah,
so the questions really come around with it. In podcasting, there's a four-letter word that crosses all of our minds at some point. It's not what you're thinking. It's the Q word, quit. Because, inevitably we're going to come up to some kind of a roadblock. We're going to think, what am I going to talk about next? Or if I can't find a guest, how am I going to do this? And you and I, before we push the record button, we're talking about the other big F word that does begin with the four-letter word that does begin with F, and that's failure. And
sure.
so please talk a little bit about that because you've got some experience in there, some best-selling books, some. Can we dive deep into that?
Sure. Failure has been a big part of the research that I've done in the recent years in my life. And I did write a book called The Gift of Failure. And the first line of the book is, I hope you fail. I hope you fail a lot. And the reason for that is, I believe there is so much miseducation around that word. And I know in my own journey of just like the self abuse of failure and feeling inadequate and self doubt and all these other things, where in fact, failure is how you learn to win. And that's not some corny line. It truly is in those dark nights of the soul that we all go through as human beings. If you do take the moment for the introspection, and Donna, you reminded me of something that you experienced with Mr. John Maxwell, about when you get knocked down from a failure, don't get back up until you figure out why you got knocked down. And I think that I summarized what you had shared, from
Right. Yeah.
from John. And I think that's exactly right because failure on its face is one thing and it could be maybe bad, but the moment of pause and the introspection into that failure, which is very difficult, by the way, it's, not going back into how you failed and reliving, sometimes those horrifying moments of how you got to that point. But leaning into that pain, and going through and being comfortably uncomfortable to figure out what happened there as best you can and sifting through the rubble that could be your life, could be your marriage, could be your business, could be whatever. But going in there and sifting for gold, and taking the time to sift through it, you'll inevitably pull out a nugget and have a new meaning for that failure because I don't think you can change facts per se, but you can change what they mean. So when something inevitable or maybe bad happens and everything is destroyed, you can go back and say, "Oh, this means that I'm an idiot." Well, if you go back and find a piece of wisdom, it could mean, that you pick something out that's great, that's going to set you on through a trajectory of something so much more beautiful and so much more enlivening. And I found at this point in myself, as a father, as a businessman, as just a human being, that sitting with those failures a little longer and rummaging through them and trying to find that kernel of gold has become more and more gratifying, although admittedly sometimes incredibly emotionally difficult. But once you get to that aha moment, there's this incredible satisfying moment of saying, "Oh shit, that's why I had to get my teeth kicked in. I got it." And then get reinvigorated and go back out there.
Hmm. I just was taking notes as you were talking, and when you said failure is how you learn to win, that quote is I'm gonna be putting a lot of thought into that one because a lot of times we think of our results as who we are, and it's not. It's that
That's
outside thing,
right.
like you said, the kick in the teeth that for me, when I first started behind the microphone, just about every microphone I got behind stopped working. I like even in the WNTW studios in Richmond, Virginia on the radio, my microphone, and I had to say, why is this happening? What energy is this going in there? And I had to learn that lesson myself. So I love that you say failure is how you learn to win. Where else can we go with this in this idea that failure is not failure? And that when you push through the other side, because I was reading your bio and you and I were talking a little bit, accomplishments. You just said you didn't wanna talk about you, but we gotta go there a little bit. Because we're not just talking about the 60 listeners that you had mentioned early on in the conversation. You've got a good number of listeners across many platforms. You've sat in many seats, and there are people who are listening to this podcast who probably think, "Oh gosh, how will I ever get there? And if I get there, what do I do next? Like how do I negotiate and navigate all of this?" And can you touch a little bit on that?
Yeah, I think one of the main premises, and I think the main point is I'm just a regular person. And I think that's something, and I mean that truly honestly. I had a terrible speech impediment growing up. I was raised by a single dad. I was very fortunate and blessed profoundly to have all my faculties, have all my senses, have all my limbs working, and have my health. And I've spent a profound amount of time working on health and wellness for myself because I find the healthier I am, the better I can work and the more I can contribute. But going through two community colleges, ultimately, graduating top of my class, getting through law school and, building these things. But this underlying premise of keep going. And I know some of this stuff might sound corny, but every time I felt like I couldn't go any further in everything, a rep at the gym, something emotionally, something academically, something financially. Every time I got to that moment where I felt like I had done everything I possibly could, that wasn't true. There was still something left. There still was gas in the tank. And taking a moment to see the tools that I still had that were intangible. If it was a money issue, building this massive, massive business, I still had me. I still had my voice. I could call one more client. I could pick up the phone and get up one more day. If it was something at school, like I could still register for another class. I could drop this one and try again. But every time, and David Goggins, I think some people have seen him. He's a very eccentric gentleman. He's the one that's won, the most pull-up competitions and has done 20 different hell weeks, as a Navy SEAL. And he's this just amazing person in so many ways. And I adore him, honestly. I don't know him personally, but I've read his books. And um, one of his first books is called You Can't Hurt Me. And it's about this concept of you can hit me, you can strike me, but I'm going to keep going. And he makes a point that I really resonate with, is saying that when you think you're done, you've only got to 40% of your capacity.
Wow.
And for a guy that's been through all those Navy SEALs trainings, and I know the Navy SEAL training of being a mom or being a dad or whatever your own moment is when you're done. And as a father, there's been plenty of times with kids crying and babies are like, there's no way I can do this again. And you do. But if you can say to yourself, when you think you're cooked, I am only at 40% of my capacity, something happens for me inside of me where I get a little bit of a boost. I get a little
Mm.
tired, exhausted, sick, sore. And And if you remind yourself of that, you get back up and you go again because there is magic in persistence. There is magic in continuing on. And all the great sages, all the great oracles since the beginning of time have said this in some capacity, whether they John Maxwell, Napoleon Hill, or religious leaders and prophets, is like persisting and having faith that the step is going to be there when you take that next step. But that one reminder of, when I'm spent and I don't got anything left in me. So I think that is a psychological barrier, and it is a fucking lie. It is a lie. You have more. Keep going. You have resources. It is not just about the resources, it is about being more resourceful and going in and taking inventory of those assets you have. If you're fortunate enough to have this digital device that you're getting this message, if you're fortunate enough to be in a place where you have liberties, you have resources beyond measure. You just need to focus on them.
Yeah, yes, that very profound what you're saying. Seth Godin, I was listening to him one time and he asked the audience to raise their hand and he said, "Now raise it higher." And for all the hands that went higher, he said, "Why didn't you go the full distance the first time?" And
Beautiful.
why do
Oh,
we do that to ourselves? Because we think this is enough, but no, I'm going to raise it all the way. Um, I'll have to look into that author because the Navy SEALs. I have a military background myself, not Navy SEALs, no, nowhere close to
yeah,
that. But
no, but David Goggins is a national treasure. Is in what he has been able to accomplish, his background, his upbringing, the abuse he endured. And
mm,
again, he's running 4 marathons back to back and not sleeping for 3 days and, like, ridiculous things, but he's just a testament to that we can raise our hand a little higher, and not comparing somebody else's journey to your own, I think, is cruelty. But looking at yourself of whatever that moment is, raise your hand a little higher in that moment for you. Whatever that is,
mhm,
anybody listening to this, anybody that is in that moment, to Seth's comment, raise your hand a little higher today. And then tomorrow, raise it a little higher again and raise it a little higher again, because this 2 million-year-old reptilian brain that sits in our heads was designed to keep you safe, not for you to prosper. And when you know that you are safe, you're in a home, and the threats now are from social media or from media outlook, are verbal. They're not necessary. They could be a lion chasing you in some parts of the world, but chances are most of the people hearing this don't have an actual lion chasing them. So the barrier is psychological. And since the barrier is psychological, chances are they are self made barriers. And since you made the barrier, you can also break it.
mm. Beautiful. That's beautiful. Was there a particular mentor along the way for you that helped break the barrier besides David Goggins? I know you mentioned John Maxwell.
My,
What was
my
it?
father, my father,
Yeah. How
um, my,
so?
fa- my father, just because no matter what was around, and I have this conversation with him as recent as yesterday, of something happening that just keep going and reminding me, giving me the book Think and Grow Rich when I was 13 years old. And when I didn't want to read, I was just a punk kid, and I didn't want to go to school, didn't want to do whatever. And just him saying, read it. And then after I read it, read it again and read it again, and reminding me about faith and belief and auto-suggestion and setting goals and achieving them, and all of these different systems and this blueprint that he lays out. And again, a lot of great minds have done something for me. Think and Grow Rich, it just has such a wealth of knowledge of the formula of this human experience and how you can become, the master of your fate and the captain of your soul. Um, and and I think that point of constantly reminding ourselves that there are ingredients for how you achieve things. And it starts with an idea, it starts with belief, and you can cultivate belief and you can cultivate faith. And the more you repeat things, because energy goes where focus goes. So the more that you think about your problems, the more the problems are going to be there. But what's wrong is always available. but so is what's right. And then the act of building the muscle of pulling yourself back to what's right, pulling yourself back into what you're grateful for, pulling yourself back into it is where you build the muscle of resilience because that is what it is, in my opinion. I think there's an actual muscle. And if it's hard for you to do it, you haven't worked it out. You haven't
Mm,
done your emotional fitness. Just like you go to the gym, you don't build big biceps and go to the gym one time. You go to the gym 100 times, those biceps are going to grow. And I think the same thing, if you personify that same emotional emotion of bringing yourself to be resilient, bringing yourself to raise your hand a little higher, bringing yourself to do those things. And the act of doing that and failing at it and falling back into those negative emotions, those lower base level emotions, and then pulling it back into higher elevated emotions. Just like the reps get easier, just like the weight gets stronger, you become bigger and you become more capable.
you become. It's all about becoming, isn't it?
That's right. And people, I hate when people say, I mean, I don't hate anything, but they say, people say, fake it till you make it.
Oh God.
And I think it's such an inaccurate statement. If you're going
You
to
can't.
fake it till you become it.
Mhm. Yeah. We're
Making
all on a
anything, you're becoming something.
mhm. We're all on this becoming journey. That's why I use the word journey a lot. Any email I sign is your friend on the journey. This is loving the journey. It is about the journey, and the only time we can say we've arrived, I think, is at our last breath.
That's right.
You know.
That's right. And I think also remembering that, somehow we got brainwashed into thinking that we're not supposed to have problems. And problems are the gifts that we grow from. Problems mean that you're alive. The only people that don't have problems are 6 feet deep. Only
Mm.
ones. If you have problems, that means you're still breathing, means that there's still room to grow. And the problems are the obstacle course. You don't need to go to the Himalayas to go whatever, you can do these things. Your life is your initiation. Your life is the training ground.
Yeah. That's a good nugget. I'm going back for that one after.
That was actually Dr. Joe Dispenza. I learned
Oh
that
yeah,
your life is your initiation. I learned from Dr. Joe,
yeah. Mhm.
who again another one that is just a national treasure.
Yeah, indeed. Do you have a daily practice?
I do. I do. And I change it constantly because I think consistency, Ralph Waldo Emerson said, consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. And I think being consistently inconsistent is also very important because it's like doing the same workout over and over again. You never grow. You need to challenge your body to move in different ways, think in different ways, read different books, constantly be challenging your routine. But the routine for me around any type of self improvement, any type of constant, never ending improvement, this Kaizen, this Japanese concept that has this word for it, which is constant, never ending improvement. But there are components that are staples in my life. One is meditation, various modalities of meditation that I've experimented with, moving my body vigorously in some capacity, eating whole foods. Um, Hydrating, in these very human characteristics, putting inputs, mental, emotional inputs in, whether for listening to great podcasts, reading great books, different sound and audible things, having beautiful conversations, but these staples around then constantly switching them up and reinvigorating them to do different things because if you don't use it, you lose it, and this is a natural thing, and that's for just about everything. And so constantly finding new ways to challenge the body, challenge the mind, challenge beliefs, change them, think about them, listen to new perspectives, and be open to be wrong, be open to be able to say in harsh words what I believe today, and then hear a new variable and have the courage to change my beliefs tomorrow when I have new inputs and new variables.
Mm. Yeah, the only thing constant is change, is what
Yep,
they say.
that's right. That's yeah, and this proverbial they have a lot to say these days.
Yeah, yeah, they do. I've never quite heard the daily practice though in put just the way that you put it, that it can't be always the same. There has to be some change to it.
I
Love
think that's
Emerson, and love
and and like I said, for me, these are and opinions, everybody's got an opinion, if you know what I mean, not to be too crass. But with that said, just listening to your own voice, I think, has so much brilliance in it of, yes, having advisors, yes, going and hearing different perspectives, but having the courage to listen to your own voice, listen to your own calling, listening to your own beliefs, and having the courage to change them when you get new inputs. I think it, for me, has been a big part of the process.
Yeah, and being sure that the voice that you're hearing in your head is your voice and not the
That's
voice
right.
of your tribe,
That's right.
trying to
Th-
keep you safe
That's
along the way.
That's right. And survival and productivity and surviving and thriving are the same thing. And I think the only way that you can really gain these elevated emotions, these happiness, fulfillment, these things is when you're making progress. And measuring the progress is a different discussion, but any type of progress, and progress is not linear. You take a step back, like in basketball, they call it a step back jumper. So you get hit, you take a step back, you create space, and then you shoot the shot. So just progress doesn't necessarily mean, some metric of growth every single day. Progress requires taking a step back. It takes, hit starting, to build a new building. We build buildings all over the country, huge skyscrapers, industrial facilities, houses. And sometimes there's an old building there that you have to level it. You have to completely tear it down before you build something new. And that's the same thing with growth, same thing with progress is you got to tear down things which appears to be a step back, but in reality is just making space for growth.
Very beautifully said. Ari, there is one person listening to our voices right now, and you have something to say to them. This is it might be metaphysical in saying this, but I believe that people listen, they're attracted for a reason. There's an energy going on. What
I
is that
agree
one thing that this person who's listening needs to hear and only you can say it?
that it's going to be okay.
Mm,
It's
wow.
all gonna it's all gonna be okay. It will. And it maybe not when you think it should, and maybe not today, but if you wake up again tomorrow and you wake up again the next day, it's gonna be a little less, it'll be a little less, and then one day you're gonna wake up and it's gonna be okay.
Hmm. Wow. And whoever needed to hear that, you can put this on repeat. You can
Yeah,
listen to
you
Ari
can.
every day say that to you. Oh, this is beautiful. Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap things up?
Yeah, I mean, to your point of these podcast hosts that are out there, I want to just say from my own experience yet again that this is a gift to society. Using the modality of our time, using the modality, the digital modalities, the technological modalities to go touch somebody at home, to be able to see your face, to be able to hear your voice. If you have this dream or this impetus to be a host and share these gifts, you have an obligation to. You have an obligation to yourself, to the people that are listening, to the prospective listeners in the future. And as I said, you never know who's listening. And if you're doing it, just keep going and keep showing up. And every time something goes wrong and your microphone fails and, Riverside doesn't update the thing properly or whatever shit happens, take a moment to pause and say on the other side of it, you very easily could be changing someone's life. You could literally be something that's keeping the gun out of their mouth in the morning. And if you keep that in your mind that somebody out there is suffering and somebody needs to hear something and somebody wants to grow, that business could be the next thing that changed people's lives. That piece of esoteric wisdom could be something to quell their emotional pain. But there's gifts to be had, and there's gifts in human interaction. There's gifts in alchemy in these types of discussions, and you can do it, and you should.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing your journey so openly with us today. That we've been having conversations and deep wisdom nuggets with Ari Rastegar, and you can learn more and reach more and connect and reach out to him at www.rastagarinvest.com. We'll put the link in the show notes, but that's rastagarinvest.com. And you can find Ari's investment platform and learn more about his background as an investor, an author, and explore his real estate and private capital strategies, understand how institutional style thinking is applied to real world investments. And it's a great resource for listeners interested in investing mindset and how to grow it at large scale. This has really touched my soul. You've been the first. You'll always be my first on this Loving the Journey podcast. Ari, thank you so much for being here today. Listeners, thank you so much for joining us. Continue to listen because there's more of this to come down the road. Until next time, keep loving the journey and don't quit. Stay with it. Fail forward. We'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
It was a privilege. Thank you, Donna.